too. All right. So this is our audio one. Now, this is just a sample of the stuff. This is, I have to go and load all my stuff. This is going to be the final video of mine. And all about me, projects. That's not all about me. The beat, movie, there it is. Okay, now again, it's kind of subtle like the ones we watched last week, but if you watch as it's moving, there's these little like bursts in the background. When the piano keys hit, those bursts are activated. And I think this was the piece I said was a pretty boring piano piece, but I actually spliced it so that I got this kind of story. So there's actually, if I turn the audio down so it's not crackling all the time. So it starts off very slow, very somber. And this is what I felt. This is, as I'm listening to the piece of audio, this is what in my mind I'm picturing is what's happening, is just kind of like this flowing of the music. Okay, I'm like honing in on one of the instruments to get that. And then when this happens, when that big sound comes, I'm picturing more things kind of going on. It's more exciting. But like most things in life, it doesn't last, and then everything goes away. I'm back to that. And then they disappear. Okay? So this here took me a few hours to set up, because it's not just, again, it's not something that is click a bunch of buttons and then there it is. It's a lot of work. Okay? So I want to go through how mine's set up and then just go through some tips of what I did with that. So the first thing that I did was, of course, get the audio. Okay? So using Audition, which I showed last week, I was able to cut up that piece of audio and line it up perfectly. That part alone took some time because I have to go through and find what audio piece I like, which one I want to start with. After I find the one I want to start with, then I'm going in there and saying, okay, well, it's 4 minutes. That's way too long. I only need 30 seconds. What's a good 30 seconds to get? I like this part here. I like this part here. I like that part there. Okay, so that's the... yeah, okay. Just make sure I got the right one. Okay, so this is what my end audio ended up being, is this 30-second clip. Okay, now you can hear not the first transition, okay, but this actually repeated a few times. This wasn't like exactly the way it was. This little piano thing repeated a few times, and I just cut a couple of them out. I found the spot where it was a good spot to end it, a good spot to start it, and I just eliminated that, and then it blended nicely. If it didn't blend nicely, I hit undo, I adjusted it a little bit, deleted that, and played it until I got that to work. So right there is one of the transitions. You couldn't hear it because it just blends nicely together. You'll hear the other one right here, right there. Right, it's subtle, right, but it's there. It's that. That's the other one, okay? And that, again, is where I'm like, okay, I needed to end here and do this. So I found a good spot to cut it out and did that. Okay, it's kind of like video, right? If you have a big strip of video, you cut this, you cut that, you put these together, and it looks like it flows from one to the other, right? So that's what I did. So I did that. Now, in Audition, and this was a thing that I found out while I was playing with it, is that you can put markers in here. I knew you could put markers, and that's no big deal. But what's cool about it is that that marker actually came over into After Effects. So here's that marker right there. So if there are certain spots that you're like, oh, I want this to happen here or there, you could do that inside of Audition and then bring it in After Effects, and it's no big deal. The process for making markers in After Effects and Audition is exactly the same. You hit the play button, which is a space bar, and then you use the multiply, the asterisk on the numeric keypad. So as I hit play, I can just tap the asterisk, and you can see how it puts in markers. Okay? So the next part of this, after I got that audio in, it's not going in there and just starting to animate stuff, because that's not the flow for it. That's not the way that it should work. The way it works is we have to figure out where we want stuff to happen. What are the keys that are going to be driving this? So I listened to it, and I listened to it probably 10 times, and each time I kind of got the rhythm of it, like what's happening here. In my mind, I'm playing out that audio piece, so I know what's happening. So as it's going, I'm getting ready for it, and I'm hitting that marker. So I'm kind of knowing when stuff's gonna hit, okay? You can look at this graph all day long. It doesn't mean anything really to you except here it's quiet, here it's loud. But knowing where that stuff is gonna hit, I put a marker basically where those piano notes are coming in, because that's what I want to be my driving force in this, is having every time the piano note hit, one of those bursts would happen, or something would happen. I didn't even know what at the time. I just knew something would happen, some sort of explosion, and have the full design down. Okay? So when I save that and I go into After Effects, and I reload it, I don't think it's gonna update, no. Oh, I have to interpret, main, oops, not main. I have to replace. I just wanna make sure that it's loading it to the correct folder. Alright, it's loading the right audio, okay. Now see, it didn't update the clips here, my marker's down there, so that's obviously something that doesn't come over. So that's again something else I found out. I usually do that in After Effects anyway, is just do them right here, and I actually just create a null layer. So this is just a null, just like we've created nulls before, with just my audio markers on there. And I do it the same way. I hit, instead of the space bar, which obviously you could hit, let me make a new null. I'm going to call this layer marker 2. And as long as I'm clicked on here, I can hit the period. Period is just audio playback. And then as it's playing the audio, then I can just hit that to mark it. Now it's not playing back here because I'm also recording and playing at the same time, but it would play back your entire audio clip, okay? So again, I went through this like several times before I even started making markers. Because in a sense, you have to be kind of aware of when those things are going to hit so that you can put the marker in the right spot. Okay? So now that I have these markers here, I can easily look at where I need things to happen. So if I look at this marker and I move down, you'll see that there is one of my explosions here is lined up with that marker. And when I go to the next marker, I have another explosion timed up with that one. Okay? And then the same thing for all the other ones. I have different things happening for each one. Now the big thing here is that all of these things floating around are particles. So we used particles before. I showed that when I did the cards. I showed that when we did the smoke in the last assignment. It's the same thing. I just made them bigger and I just let them be just these floating kind of particles. So just so you can see the particle part again. I made a new solid. There it is. I added particular. Where are you at? Under trap code, under particular. There you go. Okay, now this is, again, the default particles we get are just these like spraying out ones. So I didn't want spraying out. What I wanted was my little particle, my little sphere or circle is kind of floating through these things. Okay, so I wanted a big grid. So I went under my emitter and I changed this to a box. You can use grid too. I just like box better. And then I just stretched it out, like ridiculously big. Okay. Now in order for this to go from here and animate all the way over to here, I couldn't do that in my current composition, the way it's set up, because I stop here and I start there. I could have, animated this thing super tiny right here going across that, but it just didn't seem like what I wanted to do, okay? So what I did was I made my composition width enormous, okay? Now this isn't my final composition, this is just me kind of setting it up. This is just me getting my things lined up, my animation lined up, and then I can use a camera afterwards to move it along this composition, okay? Don't think of your composition as like, this is all that I'm working with here. There's stuff that goes beyond that, okay? So that's what I wanted to do. I made this thing huge, like maybe 5,000, I don't even know, okay? And then I made my particles huge. Now in order for this to be huge, I have to make sure that my layer is also fit to that. There we go. And then I made my particles really big. Oops, that's the position. Where's my grid? There we go. And I'll make the particle size bigger so you can see them. There we go. Okay, so I made this obviously as tall as I need it to be. I made it deep so that I have particles really far away and really close up. And I made it really long so that it spanned the entire thing. And then I added more particles to kind of fill in. Okay, so now I have this kind of array of dust basically just kind of hanging out. Something else happening inside my scene. When I hit play, you'll see how they're all kind of like popping into frame, and it's actually maybe a bit too much. So what I did was I set this to, I don't know what it was, 10 I think. And I can pull this back. And as I pull this layer back, what happens is all the stuff that's over here before our current time, it's already emitting particles. And the particles are just there at the beginning instead of being created. Okay? So let me undo that. At the beginning of this, there's no particles. As I hit play, particles start to pop on. I didn't want that effect. That like ruins it. What I wanted was these particles just to be there at the beginning. So I take this solid and I just slide it back. And that gives me what's called pre-roll, so that my particles are basically created before the time starts and they're automatically there. Okay? And then there's also a lifespan on the particles. So I went to the lifespan, I made the lifespan bigger. And I also made it a little bit random too. Okay, now these are huge compared to the ones I actually used, but just so you can see them, that's what they are. Okay, they're also moving a bit quick, so I went to my velocity and I lowered that, and I lowered the random, because I wanted it to seem like dust. I wanted it to seem just kind of like stuff floating around. Now some other stuff that I did was when it does that final burst at the end and all those particles fill up, I added a whole bunch more particles. I just keyframed this. Just went boom here. Oops. Wherever that keyframe went. Right there. And then I added a bunch after this. And then when I was ready, I took it back down to 10 or whatever it was. Okay, so there's nothing, nothing, nothing. And then what happens is we hit those particles. There's a big burst of particles. And then there's that. Okay, and I also animated the emitter moving itself. Okay, now again, this isn't something that you're gonna know right off the bat. You're gonna look at it and say, you know, it needs more movement, it needs more something there to get the idea across that there's more stuff going on here. So maybe we kick up the velocity too at that same time. Now the particles are moving faster. Maybe I change their position Z so that it looks like they're coming towards the camera a little bit more. Okay? All of these things are things you can add to it as you go, because you just don't know what it's going to look like yet. Okay? So those are my particles. Now once I had these laid out, then I just made a ellipse. Okay, I made it the correct size. That's obviously not the correct size. So I'll make this, I don't know what it was, 500 by 500 or whatever. I picked a good color. And then I just animated him. He's actually too big still. Let's go 200 by 200. So I started off way back here. And I just set a position keyframe at the beginning. And then I went to the very end of my clip, which is at 30 seconds-ish. My particles didn't continue, so I'll make sure they continue. And then I just drug him, not that, I drug him down to the end. Okay. Now once he's down at the end, then it's simply a matter of just going through and just adding some random motion. So here I just kind of pulled him up a little bit. And then there I pulled him down a little bit. And here I pulled him up a little bit. Now when he does that big burst, most of the time he's actually on the bottom, kind of wavering around the bottom. When there's that big burst, I actually pulled him up so that it's kind of like he's raised up. He's excited. He's high. You know, he's going crazy. I didn't mean high. Okay. So then I tweaked his motion as well, just to kind of go through and give it something more natural. And again, this was a 3D layer so that he's actually 3D and not just a 2D thing. There he goes. Okay. So then I went back to my composition at this point. Once he was done, I was happy with his motion. Then I went back here and just reset this. And I did mine at 1920 by 1080. You can just stick with that 960 by 540 that we talked about before. Okay, so now he's gone. He's way over here. I can't see him. But what I can do is make a camera. And I think I set this to maybe it's 25 or something. There we go. And then I made a null, just like we talked about last time too. And then I parented my camera to the null. Cam controller. And you'll see how important just all this labeling stuff is. So it's a 3D camera. I'm going to scoot this over. Oops, over. And there he is. And then I can set his position here, go to the end, there, and then scoot the camera down the other way. And so now he's basically floating through all these particles. I'll kind of speed this up a little bit. So he's floating through these particles like it's a cloud bank or something. And you see how it looks like a 3D camera. It looks like it's an actual camera. The stuff that's really far away is moving very slowly, and the stuff that's really close is moving pretty quick. Okay, remember our first assignment, the Angry Birds, how we kind of fake that by moving this way and this and whatever, kind of doing that manually. Well, now we're doing it the correct way, okay, using 3D layers. This way makes it a lot easier because we don't have to worry about the timing of it. It's just automatically there. Okay, so that was that part. And then the rest of it was just doing those little explosions in there and then tweaking some of it. So for my explosions, I used this. Bloop. See that one little blip? So I made one blip. That's it. Just this bloop, like that. And then I went into my explosions composition, and I just duplicated it. Let me shrink some of this stuff. Holy cow. So I took that, and you can see how many circle blips, that little bloop thing, I just reused over and over again. And I got that. And all it is just duplicating it and just offsetting it and moving it and scaling it. That's all it is. So you see here, there's the first one, there's the second one, there's the third one, but then I also have these little guys. They're just scaled down and pushed over there. That's all they are. Now I could have created 5 different circle blips and used those 5 different circle blips inside this animation to give it even more variation. Okay? So there's my explosion. That's the same explosion over and over and over again this entire time. I didn't make 17 explosions. I made one, and I resized it, positioned it, rotated it, changed the color a little bit to get all those to look correct. So my final comp, you can see here's all those explosions. And even though I had markers for these, the markers are just rough spacing. You have to watch this thing. I probably watched this thing 100 times, making sure that my timing was right, making sure that these things are hitting on those right markers. And there's probably still one or here or there that's just a little bit off. Okay? And you can see how slow this is going. I have motion blur on too. And then getting all this stuff to like sync up as far as colors and as far as everything else goes, it takes a lot of time. Let me see if I had any effects on this. I'm just gonna pull this over. Yeah. See, I had a hue and saturation effect on this. And I also had, where was my other one at? Cam controllers, movers. Oh, here's my particles. My particles had color correction too. One of the things I found out, and again, this is just, you just don't know until you start playing with these, is that on the particles themselves, yeah, they are, I can set their color at birth, okay? So what that means is that I could just have it be right there. Or I could set it to be over life, but I have to choose basically from this color swatch. Basically, the particles start to be this color, and they end up being that color. I didn't want that. What I want to do is be able to change the particles' color at any point, okay? So I added a hue and saturation to this. That didn't seem to do what I wanted, okay? So I don't really need that. Then I tried to change to color, and that worked. Change to color was like the perfect way to change that color. Now I also have on here, I have two particles. One of them, let me shrink these down. I have the change to color. The other one, I actually have a change to color. I tried a glow, didn't care for the glow, so I don't need that. But this one I blurred, and then I changed the exposure to, just to give me a little bit of something extra on the particles. You can see how they're kind of like dull and boring, and then just that makes them have a little bit more 3D to them. It makes them feel like there's a little bit more life to those particles instead of, you know, just circles, blurry circles, okay? So again, this is stuff that you kind of play with and tweak as you're going. You kind of say, well, those look kind of boring. Let me try this. Let me see if this is going to work. Let me play with these settings. And then for my ball, I didn't even cover that. I could have used a different color for it, but I actually just had 4 different color spheres. So there's the bright orange one here. There's the dark one. There's the medium one. And then there's the mid one of these. Oh, the mid's turned off. That's why we can't see him. There he is. Okay, so I actually used just these 4 circles parented to each other, or parented to a null actually, and then I just keyframed their visibility off. You could have done it 15 other ways. And then I have these slices here. That's just this thing that just wipes across at some point further down here.
Where did you teach that? Did you just do hue and saturation?
For my coloring, I did hue and saturation for these slices, but for the particles, I did change to color.
I put change to color.
You have to pick the particles. Well, here, again, it's kind of like a playing around thing. Let me go to my bright sphere here. Okay, so if I did a change to color on this, effect, color correction, change to color, there it is. You pick the color, orange. What color do you want it to be? I want it to be purple. Okay, this time it's actually pretty close, but it's only changing the hue at this point. I have to tell it to do hue, lightness, and saturation, and then I'll get something closer to that color. And then I also can play with this tolerance here to get a different color. Okay, so again, it's something you just kind of play with, and if you get stuck and you're like, why isn't this working? Ask me, ask Google, ask your neighbor, ask the help files, ask anyone you can. Sometimes, and this might sound silly, just talking it through. Like, okay, I'm clicking here, I'm not clicking there. Done, and you figure it out, okay? So that's what most of this is. It's just me moving stuff and laying it out exactly where I want these things to happen, okay? That's everything you just saw. That's how I did it. And then there's some other finishing stuff that I did to it, which was, there's a vignette. So if you look, oops, there should be a vignette. Oh, let me crank it up so it's a little bit more apparent. And then turn it on. There it is. So you can really see how some of these are kind of darkened a little bit here, and then still lighter in the center. Again, kind of giving focus to my little dude there. Especially right there. It looks really cool there, having this good contrast up here of the really, really dark, the really, really bright, kind of the orange and the blue mixed into that as well. The other thing that I did to this that is a little bit different than what we've done is on the camera itself, I did turn on depth of field here. So I enabled depth of field, and then it's just a matter of playing with these settings to get the correct depth of field, to make sure that your item is locked in and that's in focus, and then everything else is out of focus. Okay? And that's how I'm getting all of this stuff. Without that, oops, let me click my camera again. Camera settings, depth of field is off, hit OK. That's what I was getting. That looks pretty horrible, right? You can still see the main one, but it's not as apparent. The story isn't really there. We lose it because we don't have depth of field clicked on. And then once we add a depth of field to it, he pops, right? So again, this is all stuff that you just kind of go through and process as you're working, okay? So now this is, like I said, it's all just kind of like lining it up all manually. After Effects, not by default, but with the use of these trapcode plugins, there's actually a tool that we can play with that allows us to do more stuff. It's project. There it is. Oops, to use that one. Okay. So here is an audio clip that I have, and this. Let me just make sure I click the right one. That's particular. That's light factory. I don't need that. That's sound keys. Okay. All right. So watch the number of particles coming out. So the audio at the beginning, pretty boring, really slow, da da da. We hit that crescendo, boom, bunch of particles come out and they're going very quick. No keyframes, okay? That is all driven by this guy right here and my audio. So I'm gonna show you how we can set that up too, because it's kind of a neat way to work. So I'm just gonna drag this to a new composition. Oh, now all my markers came in that time, so I can just delete those. Okay, so I have this. I'm going to use a new layer. So I'll make a new solid. This is my audio grabber, or whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to put on this Trapcode plugin called Sound Keys. And this is, there's other tools inside After Effects. They're nowhere near as nice as this one because of what it does. Okay. So here's what it's looking at. Right now, it's not connected to anything. I have to tell it which audio file. I might have 75 audio files. It doesn't know which one. So I'm going to say I want you to use the Alasdair Cooper audio clip. And I want you to mix the channels because I want to see both of them. Now, as I play it, you can see what it's doing here. It's kind of like a spectrum. Okay, so imagine that you had an equalizer like on a radio. You know, you have all those little sliders. That's what we're seeing basically. Okay. So it's reading this information. Now what I'm going to do is there's this box here. I'm going to slide this box down into this area and put this maybe about here. Okay. What this is going to do is it's going to read all this information inside here and come up with values. Okay, so imagine that we're looking at this with a ruler and we're saying how tall is this one, how tall is that one, how tall is this one, and then we find the average of all of these. Okay, that's what that far right thing is the average of it. So watch now as I hit play. You can see how that far right one is moving up and down. All right, so pretty neat. Now let's apply it to something. So I'm going to grab a wrong area right there. I'm going to grab this guy, and I'm just going to make, not on that one, on a brand new layer. There we go. And I'm going to round him back out so he is lined up with this. There we go, perfect. All right, so I'm going to go to my audio grabber, and I'm going to say apply this information. Now once I apply it, what I get is keyframes. So see where this says output 1? It's just a load of keyframes saying how high that item is. So now I'm going to go to this, and I'll go to position, and yeah, position will work. So I'm going to alt click on position so that I can pick whip this output. Okay. Now it's going to shoot it way over there because this is at 0. It's going to set those to 0. So I'm just going to add in what it was originally, plus these numbers here. All right, we'll leave it at that, and we'll just do something after this. Temp equals temp. Plus. Come on. Good. There we go. All right, so that's scooting it over 100. Let's scoot it over 300. Perfect. Okay, so now it's 300 and 300. Maybe a little further down. 6. There we go. Okay. So now, as we watch this, what it's going to do is it's going to move that thing. Okay. Now it's very, very subtle. We can barely see this thing moving because it's moving like a pixel. That's all it's moving. If we look at these values here, or nothing, it's not moving anything. Why didn't it move anything? Output, range, average or range, yes, yes, yes. Apply. All right, I'm going to pull this down. That was the next thing I was going to say, is we're going to pull this down and then hit apply. Range 1, output, active, yes. This, spectrum adjustments, scale, pull that up. All right, let me just go back to my other one that did work. Let's see why it's not working. To use this. So on this one it worked. If I go to this, if I hit apply, next that 1.575 treble range, that average, instant, output max. Maybe range 1 is broken. I'm going to deactivate range 1 and reactivate range 2. Now again, this could be just something I just need to reboot the After Effects and then it works. Obviously we've been having some fun stuff with that. Alright, let's save this. Let's reboot After Effects. Now what should be happening is that it should be outputting those data. So if it's going up to the average is 5, and then 1, and then 5, and then 2, and then 3, it should be outputting all that information, and then we're using that to drive something else, to control something else. And that's how those particles were animated, is that those particles, the emission rate was being driven by that audio file. So the louder the audio got, the more particles were shooting out, the faster they were moving. Okay, let's grab that. Let's grab that. Everything looks good there. Apply. Still nothing. That there, yes, yes. Smoothness, sub bass, mid range, treble. Both of these. Alright. I'm going to delete the keyframes on output 1 and delete the keyframes on output 2 and apply it again. Alright, for whatever reason it doesn't want to edit this, that's fine. I'll just go to the other one. And that one. Okay, so this one has audio. It all worked. I don't know why the other one doesn't want to work. So then we'll just do the exact same thing. We'll just double click this. like that. Change the size of it. Okay, and then on the position of this, I'm just going to Alt-click, drag this down to here. And then just add to the temp. .600 pixels, just so it comes over here. Okay, so now there we go. So now it is moving. You can see it's very, very subtle, right? It's only a little bit. Now, I probably don't want this to move both of these. That's kind of like a weird thing. So let me get rid of that. So I'm just going to Alt-click this to get rid of it. Alt-click it again. Oops. Alt-click it. I'm going to right-click and say separate the dimensions. Then on the Y, I can Alt-click. There we go. And then Y gets its own expression. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add, oops. I'm just going to multiply it times that. There we go. So what's going to happen now is whatever number's down here, the Y position gets multiplied by it. So Y was at 320, I believe it was, something like that. So now it gets multiplied. So I'm just going to pull this up. Oops, maybe too far. There we go. So now you can see that Y's movement is being driven by this audio file. And of course, it went off the screen because now it's at like 3,500 instead of that. So I could always multiply this times something else, like 0.1, and it'll move a lot less. And then Y's positive position is going down. That's why it's going further down. So we could write other stuff to make it do different things. And you can see how it settles back into that starting spot. And I can do other stuff too, like I said. I can actually take this, because it's basically taking, if I zoom this down a touch, it's taking this number, and then it's multiplying it times the position that it already was, and then timesing it times 0.1. But if I made this negative, let's say, we'll just see what happens. Like that. And then I pull this down further. I'm trying to go really far down, just so it's kind of like in the frame. All right, so now watch what happens. Just went way off. That was too much. We'll leave it where it was. Okay, but we can also do this to things like scale. So I can take the scale of this, Alt-click, drag it to the output. And I'll actually take the positions off just so we can see it better. There we go. So right now we can't see it at all, because right now it's scaled to 9.4 or something like that, really ridiculously small. I can come back into that effect, into this effect, and instead of this being from 0 to 100, I can make it from 0 to 1. And then apply. And just got rid of everything I just had. There's something with this computer today probably that's causing this plugin to malfunction. Because it obviously worked before because I had numbers here, but every time I hit apply, it's like wiping it from this. So there might be something with the plugin not working right now. There we go. So here's the shape layer, there's a scale. So I'm just going to add to this. Temp equals temp plus 100. And then end bracket. There we go. Okay, now again, it's moving slowly. I'm going to drag it so we can see it. There you go. So right here at the end, you can really see it kind of start to move a bit. Okay. Now this is something that you can use for a multitude of things. You can use it as an average like this, or if you have a good piece of audio, you can actually use it to isolate certain regions. I'm going to jump back to my other one where I can see this a little bit clearer. So here's range 2, which we'll deactivate just so we don't confuse ourselves. There we go. Here's range 1. So range 1 I can isolate. So if I look at this little graph and I watch for a certain sound, okay, sometimes you'll actually see on this spectrum, you'll see like every time the drum hits, this thing jumps, right? So if I had a drum that always hits and this thing is always popping, what I can do is move this graph down to where it's popping, okay? And if I isolate just that region, it's only going to animate just there. So I basically can get something where I just have like this sphere sitting there, and every time a drum hits, it jumps up, right? So instead of it being shaky and moving up and down like it was just doing, it would just jump, okay? Or scale. Imagine if you had speakers, right? You had a speaker that was kind of like doo doo doo. Same thing. You could have that speaker synced up in here that would actually move and animate just like this kind of stuff.
But you need the trapcode plugin.
You need the trapcode plugin for this one. And it really bothers me that that doesn't want to output. Let's set that back to 0 to 100. Now if you did the trapcode at home, brought it in, no problem, it should work. I'm just not sure why it doesn't want to work today. And it's just me lecturing that doesn't like it. There's smoothing out too, so if you do get like this really like rough movement, you could hit smooth and it'll smooth out those values. So it's not just like this jumpingness that's happening there. Okay. So for like this, instead of having all these values averaging out because some of them are going up, some of them are going down, I could bring this right to here and isolate just that branch of the graph. And that's what's cool about this output is the output tells you what it's at, okay? And as I scale this up, you'll see how that output is shrinking down, okay? So I can again affect how this thing is animating based on that. Okay, and that's what you watch. You watch this guy and see what he does. Very cool. All right, so that's what that one is, and it's very, very cool that you can do that kind of stuff. I'm gonna jump over to YouTube real quick.